I'm just at a friend's place right now. He had to go do something for a minute, so I'm just looking at some kind of untouched nature right now. This is just what pops up. This is maybe mowed area. Here's what the grass looks like. And here's what it looks like if it's grown out. Anyway, just thinking about distribution, visual distribution, I guess is what I'm talking about here. When you're looking at a healthy, good-looking plant, I think there is this sort of intuition that you can build about what good sort of structure or distribution looks like on a plant. And this, I think, correlates with the, innate human ability to sort of recognize beauty as beauty, right? What is it that allows us to all sort of equally associate beauty with so many things? But I was out on my honeymoon in Glacier National Park and kept thinking the same thing, that there is just this sort of innate beauty to nature and the way that, in particular, plants are able to sort of spread themselves out in a way that is really beautiful. Here's an example of that. And I think flowers in particular are really interesting because when you're looking at a flower, you're looking at the sort of interaction between an animal and a plant, right? That a flower is ultimately the physical manifestation of some sort of beauty in nature in the eye of the pollinator, right? So if your pollinator is a bee, then that's going to be an elegant and beautiful thing, or eye-attracting thing, right, for a bee, right? And that's just an interaction, between the physical world and two biological entities, right? And that's really cool, because then you can sort of, I think that a beautiful flower is a beautiful flower, right? Regardless of the species of plant that's looking at it. And that's what I think is really sort of beautiful about this, is that in the end, I think we do get a chance to have kind of a primitive engagement with nature, and primitive is probably not the right word, but a innate engagement, sort of a connection that we probably can't accurately put words on, but is very real when you see something beautiful in nature. That is because everything is kind of as it should be, right? In a melodrama unfolding, right? Depending on how you look at it, right? If you're looking at individual characters, then it's a melodrama that unfolds. But if you're looking at it as the whole sort of thing, I think that you do see that it really is like just such a beautiful, unified dance. Lots of different things happening at the same time. Creativity abounding in nature. That's something I was thinking about. Is the expression of DNA, even the expression of DNA itself, actually creative rather than deterministic. There are things about it that are definitely deterministic, but I think that there are things about it that let's say this: we don't have the tools to explain the expression of DNA. there's a lot of stuff in the expression of DNA that we don't yet have the tools to explain, is what it seems to be. And that it will eventually come down to the case that I think there's going to be this sort of thing that we can't sort of mechanically explain about the expression of DNA, right? And my guess is that creativity abounds even in nature, right? But it's just at a level so subtle, right? It's just they're not speaking the same language as us in terms of our ability to realize it. But I think that at some point we could discover that other plants are, for example, expressing themselves discreetly and being sort of understood by other plants discreetly. So that's just my guess as to where in the future of science things are going to be headed. Because at a certain point, I think, the mechanical model of biology starts to maybe break down a little bit. I think that there's all sorts of things we don't understand yet that are going to become increasingly difficult to explain. And this is just in biology, right? They're going to become increasingly difficult to explain using sort of mechanical terms. And that biology is going to sort of bump into physics in interesting and unexpected ways. We know that even something, as fundamental as photosynthesis takes advantage of a sort of a hack in quantum mechanics. I'm not here to explain to you what that is. Let's discuss that at a later time. But because I don't know enough about that. But it seems that there's a lot of things that although we can't explain, we can see sort of the expression of in nature. That should be puzzling, right? So I think that given, that the model of sort of plant or sort of the expression of DNA is sort of mechanical or deterministic, right, at this point. That seems to be the assumption, but I'm here to say that it's probably not that, and that now is the time to, as Chomsky has sort of said about language, or just the physical world in general, right? It's time to be puzzled by some things that we see in nature, especially when it comes to plant life. And if we're going to try and sort of use plant life symbiotically to get ourselves out of this climate change thing, then I think that it's good to sort of understand or sort of try and formalize maybe some more sort of abstract properties of the expression of DNA. So this is just kind of what tumbles around my head sometimes when I'm thinking, when I'm out in the garden. And I think a good exercise is to go out and think aloud as you are in nature. Go to lots of different versions of, right, the expression of nature just doing its thing, right? Areas without too much human intervention. Places where you can just see life being life. And within here is, there's a lot to learn, lots of questions to ask ourselves, and questions to ask nature, right, that we can get real answers to. If we were to cut this down and throw down a bunch of seeds, what would our best bet be, right, first year around? You can kind of start to imagine how the process would go. Or actually you may have experience, taking a field like this and converting it into gardenable land, to creating the food that you want there. So I've been into Carol Deppy's book, How to Breed. I think it's, the breeding book, the one, breed your own your garden vegetables or something like that. Anyway, there's a part in it about turning wild foods, wild plants into domesticated food crops. And I think that's where it's at. I think that is an important thing to consider, right, is that all of these things that we think of as, right, the be-all, end-all of, human food, these were all once wild plants. And that if we are looking to move forward, if we're looking to diversify the sort of things that we can eat, then we're going to have to be looking at this, right? What is something that grows like a weed? What is something that grows wild in your area? And that if humans are going to survive the coming sort of uncertainty, right, I think a key part of this is going to be our sort of genetic inheritance, our ability to preserve the seeds of the world, to get as much diversity as possible. I think we're in the right place to share the diversity, genetic diversity that is out there, because it's so easy to mail a pack of seeds across the planet, right? And that's a great thing. There's never been as much access to diversity in terms of the germoplasm, right? There's sort of available genetics out there for anyone who's doing gardening of any sort. But from here out, it seems like we're going to have to really focus on sharing that diversity, that people hopefully are growing really genetically diverse Grexes. I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about Grexes in the future. I think it's going to be a lot easier to buy Grexes. I think this is going to be one of those words that's going to really take off in agriculture, because this is a good way to grow. I dropped my phone. So other than that, I would encourage everyone to just take some time to look and listen and just be in nature. To forget yourself, to forget your story, forget you ever heard a story, forget the concept of a story. Because there's no real narrative, there's no unified narrative, there's only the million different versions, the million interpretations that we as language users are sort of forced to make. But that we're here to experience the world just like everything else. So it's a beautiful day in the garden. Best wishes to you all. Here's another field, just open, just the expression of nature. What is the most worthy thing to grow here right now? It's this. What was able to get its seeds in here? What will survive and what will die? pretty cool system, and I would like you to think about how you can use that system. What sorts of decisions you can make to tip the scales in your favor biologically in an elegant way, right? What are some of the most important decisions, or sort of most important habits you can get into that will make a difference in terms of your calorie expenditure, the amount of work that you have to do, and the payoff. How much food or value do you get from this, right? And it can be actual calories or value. But I think, in the future there will be an Olympic sport in which one person, or maybe a team of people, I don't know, it'll probably have different categories, expend physical energy to produce a certain amount of calories in a growing season. This is my idea for an Olympic sport. I think it would be a very interesting Olympic sport where this is the ultimate sort of physical and mental challenge, which is given, let's say just do it with one person. Given one person and X amount of land, how much nutrition can you coax out of a piece of land? And you could also, consider have things like how much carbon can you put back in the soil, things like that. That's up to you. But that there should be, I think we should be encouraging that sort of culture, that sort of idea that one human, or a team of human, even better, a team of humans working together, right, employing these sort of common principles, can really coax a lot of good, a lot of use, and enrich the soil. And that if you did this, I'm sure there would be all sorts of methods that emerge. Let's lay down some ground rules. Let's say that on a certain level, this should be a closed loop type experiment, right? Or this should be a closed loop that you're working with in your kit. But you better believe that, I think the genetics would become really important. What you're using in the given soil, right? So this should be your native soil, right? This should be somewhere where you are familiar farming, and I think that we should be really emphasizing that point, is that the person living in the weather where they are, right, is going to be the expert, as Young Sang Cho says in the Jadam book, if you read it. You should read the Jadam book, especially the more sort of philosophical stuff at the beginning. That's where he mentions that his two biggest influences, he says something like that they are Karl Marx and Jesus Christ. And he gets kind of political, he's saying like this, any sort of method of farming that, is worth its salt should sort of bring people, empower people, right? Allow people to make a lot of money. He's always, apparently, when he took Chris Trump on a tour of Korea, was always going around asking people, tell him how much money you make. So that this is, an economically sort of viable way of thinking about the process. Jadam does not have much to say about genetics, and I think that's, you combine the two, and there's a real intersection there that I think is, extra powerful. But that's sort of to be determined. But that, it's good. You sort of, just sort of trying to prove that his method is successful, and that, you can be profitable with this if you really, tune in whatever it is that you're planting. And anyway, sort of in terms of fertility, Jadam or some sort of similar system basically takes care of it. And the rest, I would say you want to tune in with your genetics. One thing I'm noticing out here, and my friends, he used to do some vegetable gardening in here, and I don't know if you can really see, but it's kind of, there's a deer fence that's up, but the soil here is like really soft. I mean, it feels like I'm, everywhere I step, it is, and that is, what I think we need to sort of take away from this is that, like, nature in its, common, it's like if you're looking at Kentucky grassland, like on its own, doing what it does, this amount of whatever, carbon sequestration, this amount of biomass, with no human intervention, right? There's going to be some version of that we can pull off with the crops that we want, and it's just a matter of genetically tuning in what we're looking for, right? And gently sort of influencing nature in the right time at the right place as it unfolds. So sort of elegant solutions. Think of it like holding up a sail in the wind, What a great idea that was. Think of all the things that humanity achieved through what's, kind of a not exactly intuitive thing that a human would think to do, right? But that sails, were probably invented in multiple places, in multiple times. They say that's true of the bow and arrow as well, right? That a bow and arrow was probably invented in a couple different places at the same time. But it's just something, it's a technology that humans tend to arrive upon. Simply because, I mean, it's like, I think this hints at, sort of the idea that Chomsky and people like him engage in. And there is some sort of, general trend in the way that we look at the world, right? Terms like, a systematic distortion in reality is one that comes up quite a bit, but that we are biological creatures, right? And so we are going to accept shortcuts, right? If the shortcut works, we will often accept it, right? Cognitively, that seems to be the case, right? It's easier to allow a shortcut to work than to allow, right, a complete understanding. So say hacks, push themselves up in sort of the hierarchy of selection, and that means that we're going to have all sorts of blind spots in the ways that we look at the world. People like Donald Hoffman, you should check him out. There's some good videos about sort of his idea is that there's basically a kind of he uses what's called the desktop analogy, which is that you have a desktop on your computer and it gives you a general idea of the status of the computer, but it is not the ones and zeros, right? There is no actual folder, right? When you open up a folder, right? This is an abstraction that your computer uses to help you interface with it, right? And by the same token, human perception is full of these abstractions that are not actually the thing. And how could they be the thing, right? Perceiving the thing is not the same thing as the thing, right? Looking at a blade of grass is not the same thing as the blade of grass. And how could it be, right? So with that, we approach the idea of sort of living within nature. Not trying to manipulate it, right, but to gently sort of glide or sort of sail through nature, getting as much bang for the buck as possible, right, by doing as little work as possible, and that there is an elegant solution that we can negotiate with nature through observing plants, from saving seeds from plants, and from replanting those seeds. So I'm here for it. Be blessed by nature. Thank you. Philosophy seems to be troubled by the problem that any word that you use has to actually mean something. And Chomsky likes to point out that that sort of ignores the nature of what a word is, and that a word does not refer to anything in the real world in terms that a physicist can understand. That's how Chomsky likes to put it. And referring to something is an act. That's a verb, right? But that there's no sort of property in the universe of reference. And I don't know much about, modern philosophy, or sort of what, there's fighting it out. The big wigs of philosophy, what are sort of the key points. But essentially what he points out is that, the way that humans use words is more like characters in a story than it is actually. It's not about the atoms that make up the thing that we're talking about, right? When we talk about Abraham Lincoln, I like to use this as an example. When we talk about Abraham Lincoln, are we talking about his rotting corpse, right? Wherever Abraham Lincoln is buried, right? Are we talking about the atoms that were formerly Abraham Lincoln? No, right? On any level, when we talk about Abraham Lincoln, what we're really talking about is the human notion of Abraham Lincoln, or sort of the common symbol, right, that we understand to be Abraham Lincoln, or anything else. And that applies to basically, not just Abraham Lincoln, not just people, but really anything, right? What is a grass? What is a country, right? A country is a thing that people agree that a country is. But that's about it. There is no, sort of, it doesn't really exist in nature. And it turns out that a lot of things that we think are sort of rule the world don't exist in nature. Money doesn't exist in nature, but yet it seems to rule the world, right? So those are some of the big sort of understandings that come from understanding the nature of language and how we use it. So it's a way of taking sort of the vast, chaotic, swelling universe that's before us and putting it into common, sort of understandable terms. You just think about what there is a word for and what there isn't a word for in the first place. And that'll give you an idea. It's sort of hard to think about, but right, there is a word for flower, but there isn't a word for being wet from having just gotten out of the shower, right? We treat it, we can say having, being wet from just gotten out of the shower. We can combine those words together, but we don't have a word for that one thing. But that one thing might be just as common as a flower, right? So what we choose to have a word for and not have a word for, I think, gives you an indication of just how the game really works. It doesn't really matter, how many levels of detail you go into or not go into. These are simply shared sort of modes of human understanding, which are ultimately just the expression of human thought. And that's another big Chomsky point, is that